Hello, it's Elle. Welcome to another episode of Gender in Focus. Today, we're talking about what it means for trans and non-binary people to socially transition. When people hear the word transition, there is often a very specific image that comes to mind, usually focused on the more like medical side of things. And the concept of transition is actually way broader than that, and definitely doesn't look the same for everybody. So today, we're zooming in on what it means to socially transition. And as always, I'm so lucky to be joined by Kai. Hello.
Hello, how are you doing?
I'm very thirsty. I didn't drink enough
Oh.
today, and now I'm talking. I'm immediately fortunately, I have.
You've got the drink of the century.
Big Bertha.
The 2 liters of water hydration.
If you're not watching, if you're listening instead, I have a huge metal bottle of water that we call
metal.
Big Bertha.
I didn't know that.
She's metal. She's heavy. She's a big lady. Yeah.
Dang.
Love her.
I feel like she would crowd surf at a metal concert.
Absolutely, she would, and she'd start a fight as well. I feel she'd get into you know what I mean? Like she'd immediately start a fight. So love her. She's the third person in our episode today. I'm doing very well.
Welcome, Big Bertha.
Thank you. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. Yeah, as you can see, it is a glorious sunshine outside. So yeah, I'm here. I'm ready for spring. Let's go.
Oh, amazing. Most people have heard about transitioning. A lot of the time, people are leaping immediately to the medical side of things and sort of think that that's what transitioning is. But there are multiple different types of transition, 3 main ways that people transition usually. Today, we're talking about what it means to socially transition. But before we go into that, could you explain the other 2 aspects of transition?
That's very important. Absolutely happy to oblige. So, as you mentioned, social transition, we're going to talk about that, get into the weeds. But for the other 2, I'll just briefly touch on them, is medical transition and also legal transition. I think most people are familiar with medical transition, or what it more commonly used term is gender affirming care. So anything related to procedures, surgeries, hormone replacement therapies, vocal surgeries. There's just a very long list of different options available to folks. So that's gender affirming care or medical transition. And then there's also legal transition, which is related to one's government issued IDs or, formal identification. And usually there's first name or gender marker that people or gender markers that people are updating, and driver's license, healthcare cards, passports. The list is long. And so to give you a sense of what that could entail. And so that's legal transition.
Right. And then with those 2, and then in comparison, we have the third one, which is what we're talking about, social transition. And so would you be able to explain that and the kind of different elements that come within that?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is related to a whole bunch of things to one's person in terms of how one expresses oneself and or kind of shows one's gender to the world. When I think about gender identity, that's that internal felt sense of one's gender. When we're talking about social transition, it's generally related to the things that are external to somebody or related to somebody's gender expression. So some examples of that are hair lengths is a very big one. Short hair, long hair. Somehow we've gendered that in our society. I ask questions about that, but there you have it. There's different types of clothing that people choose to change about themselves. Maybe they wear dresses now or enjoy floral prints or, whatever the case may be. There's different kind of ways that society has gendered clothing. Again, why, we could ask. But people can feel more comfortable in a different type or style of attire. There's also things like changing one's first name. This is within a social context, not a legal one. this is sometimes separate from the legal. People may not
Hmm.
change their name legally, but they will change it socially.
Right.
So within their friendship circle, their family, at work, where they volunteer, they may update their first name. And again,
Hmm.
that's related to the fact that we have attributed gender to names mostly.
Hmm.
If you think about the name Scott, we have a particular assumption about what gender that person is.
Hmm.
And the last one is updating pronouns as well. So for some, that might be an important thing, not for everyone, but certainly for a
Hmm.
lot. And, could be somebody who used to use she, her pronouns and updates to they, them. So things like that.
Right. That makes sense. So when it comes to that kind of those different changes that come with social transition, someone might be doing aspects of that in one environment and then maybe not extending that into other environments. And so I was wondering
Mhm.
about that, whether you could talk about that kind of sort of fluctuation, I guess, in the way that people are expressing themselves and their gender.
Mhm. Yeah, especially at this time and place and juncture, we're at a pretty heightened and in many cases dangerous political environment to
Hmm.
where not everybody feels safe to fully express themselves in the
Hmm.
way that is authentic to them. And so people may choose to show more of themselves in an expression sort of way, or even their name or pronouns in some settings, but not others. And
Right.
this can translate to workplaces. I was just watching something on TikTok, and there was somebody saying who's non binary, uses they, them pronouns, does not bring it up at work. It's just not
Right.
worth the hassle. And
Yeah.
so that's a choice, an active choice that somebody has made, usually based on safety, convenience, efficiency, exhaustion, you know,
Right. Yeah.
a whole number of things. So people are making, or sometimes they'll tell their friend group, but not their family. So
Hmm.
there's all these places and spaces where people are making very calculated decisions based on a whole variety of reasons, all of them valid because it's really complex terrain to navigate these
Hmm.
days.
Yeah, for sure. I think for a lot of cis folks, there is this idea that trans and non-binary people are confused, or they
Mm,
don't know, they're not sure about what they're doing. And then when it comes to this like social transition, trans people are sure of who they are, non-binary people are sure of who they are, but there
mm,
are certain aspects that they maybe haven't quite figured out yet, and that's what kind of social transition can offer, is this space to just try things out. And um, I was wondering if you could talk about that and how it can be misunderstood as not being
mhm.
sure about who they are, but it's just figuring out and trying different things on instead.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, a lot of social transition is non permanent, right?
Hmm.
So it offers this unique opportunity to figure out if it's something that fits somebody, right? And sometimes we have certain notions in our head, but it's not until you translate them into reality that and interact with other people and a whole
Right.
bunch of things that it comes to life in a way that you can further assess of the authenticity of it. And
Hmm.
so getting a different hairstyle, putting on different clothes, trying out another first name or a set of pronouns that are different from the one received at birth, all of that is really valuable to clarifying. And sometimes it fits, other times it doesn't. And all of that is really important information gathering because it's non permanent. And
Right.
then
Yeah.
it gives you more direction beyond that if there are other options that are worth or necessary to pursue. And so, it, but in the exploration, sometimes that kind of social transition gets discounted in some odd way that I
Mm.
don't understand really,
Right.
because it's really important, whether it's in an exploratory phase or something kind of more set in place because
Hmm.
it was deemed great. And
Right.
you you know right away, really. I mean, some people maybe it takes a little more time, but in my experience, as an example, as soon as I wore different types of clothing and put on a binder, as an example, that flattened my chest, like all of these things instantly connected and in a way
Mm.
that is very palpable, very strong, like undeniable, right? And so
Hmm.
that's where that kind of information gathering is super important, but should not be used as a way to be like dismiss social
Right.
transition as anything less important because of that.
Right. And I think there is that kind of misunderstanding that for a lot of trans and non binary people, this is something that they've kept to themselves and haven't
Mm,
been able to express it externally. So
yeah.
this is the first time they've ever heard their these new pronouns. And so they can't know if it feels good until it's reflected externally. They
Yeah.
need to try it on, they need to feel it out first. So it's not it's not less valid if somebody changes their mind on what they asked for, like originally. It's more just about an expansion of, or like figuring out what feels affirming or what aligns with them, which they couldn't have known until
No,
they expressed that. So,
no,
or
this is
tried
like
something new.
not. Yeah, I mean, there's things that internally, but the outward portion is a bit of a question mark
Hmm.
until it's realized. And I think you're right that people can misunderstand the updates if there are
Yeah.
more than just one update. People are like, what the heck is happening? And
Right.
that's so unfair because basically somebody explored, determined it wasn't for them, and then pivoted to something else. And it's like, that's really important information. We don't want to live inauthentically or tell other people inauthentic information or
Right.
display it. Like, so I feel like people being honest is used against them.
Hmm. Yeah, for sure. And then for some, like you just mentioned then about how social transition is kind of seen as less, right, I can't remember the
Mm,
phrase that you literally just used, but you kind of described it as less important or it's seen as less serious almost, especially because it isn't as permanent. And
right.
there is that, it kind of goes on a bit further where it's seen as though social transition is kind of like the light version of transition, and
Mm.
the real transition, and I'm using heavy air quotes there, real transition is medical transition. And that's kind of what transition really means. And that's, one, obviously completely inaccurate, and two, not possible or even wanted for many trans and non-binary people. And so I was wondering if you could go into that.
Yeah, it's totally unfair. It's
Right.
really awful. It happens a lot. And I would also say that it happens within the community as well, within
Hmm.
trans and non
Yeah.
binary communities, where social is kind of discounted or dismissed or not considered as real as medical transition.
Hmm.
And there's so many variables, as you were mentioning, to medical transition. A lot of people, okay, I don't know if a lot, but it varies depending on what you're talking about. But
Right.
it's not everybody who is going for and needing medical transition. And yet
Hmm.
their transition is just as real, just as valid, and can be taken care of with what they need. And
Right.
that they've gone through the effort to specify that and then communicate that with the people around them. Like, it baffles the mind that people can discount in that way when
Hmm.
there's so many options available and what people choose for themselves is right for them. And
Hmm.
sometimes maybe need to be updated as things evolve, right? I mean, we're not static beings, even though we try to pretend we are. I don't know. It's really
Right.
interesting. So
It's so true.
social is just a set of options.
Hmm.
As is medical, and one is not more real than the other. What I think might be at play, of course, I don't have any data to support this or whatnot, but just I'm thinking that because medical transition has components that are non reversible, people feel that that quote unquote decision is more solid because you're kind
Right.
of like, this is it. Even though it
Right.
isn't, right? You
No,
can reverse
of course not.
surgeries, you can stop taking hormones. It's not actually the case, but people feel it's more solid and then
Hmm.
feel like they can rely on it more. But I think if we were able to shift as a society and just be open to things as they arise, I think we would, have a much easier time of it. Both the individuals who are experiencing that, but then also society kind of updating things. Um,
Hmm.
it's not that big of a stretch to update a name, update how somebody looks, right? Like it's just, especially if they're going to be better off for it. I don't know.
Right.
It's just, so
Agreed.
that's where
Yeah.
where I land. I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
No, I agree. I think it's this idea that a lot of the time people struggle with the idea that I am non-binary in the first place, and then talking about what I would like to. I don't know. I'm looking to get top surgery or a breast reduction in relation to my gender identity, and suddenly that is understood as, oh, I can see now that you're really non-binary because you know,
Oh, what?
yeah,
That's messed up.
it's like, oh, okay, like because you're
Mm,
willing to take certain steps in order to affirm your gender. And it's like, well, no, I was non-binary before
wow.
that, and I would have been non-binary without that. And
Yeah.
it's a really odd thing,
Hmm.
and so it comes up. Yeah, it's a really strange thing where you need to take more serious, permanent steps, serious again in quotes, in order to be validated as like real.
Yeah.
Or
To be afforded
yeah,
affirmation from others
yeah,
or society. I'm like, what? That's
mhm.
kind of backwards to the way that most trans and non-binary folks approach it. You're the gender you say you are. Period. Done.
Right.
Dang. That's wild that people, but it gives you where their frame of reference is. It's the body.
Hmm. Yeah,
And if things aren't kind of done to the body, then is
then
it
it's not
real?
real. Yeah.
Oh,
So
okay.
strange, and so much pressure on trans and non-binary people to like
Hmm.
I like I'm sure that there are plenty of people who really feel pressure to do like to make changes that they don't feel comfortable with in order to be validated or affirmed in that way. um Hopefully they don't do that, but you
Hmm.
can understand the sense of pressure
Hmm.
to do things that are expected, in the same way that we also feel pressure to do things that are expected, um, as in to not come out as trans or non-binary in the first place. We're sort of performing in this way, and then
Hmm.
when you do come out, there is this expectation of performance in another way, and it's like, can you
Right.
just let people live? Can you just let them be?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's like into the from the frying pan into the pot or whatever the expression
Hmm.
is. It's
Right.
still hot as hell.
Right. And a lot of trans and non-binary people really struggle with this concept of transitioning, in the
Hmm.
first place, because it does give that impression of a big change being needed, um, and I don't know, like a big sort of change in self almost. But
Hmm.
it's not that it doesn't necessarily, like, socially transitioning does, you are changing something, but it's almost like the concept of transition or the word transition centers people's perception of that change rather than the experience of
Mhm.
trans and non-binary people who are simply just experiencing alignment with themselves. And I was wondering if you could talk about that, like why the word
Oh.
transition is quite a sorry.
No, it's you're hitting it on the mark here. Landing the plane. Oh, it's so true. It really does speak to the orientation of folks, right? A lot of
Mm,
cis folks just are really struggle and are thinking that people are changing their gender. Like when I first came out, a bunch of family and friends are like, "Oh, you're wanting to take on the identity of a man." And I was like, "No. Sorry.
right.
Like I am that already."
Right.
And now I am going to be able to express it better. People show it to myself, right? There is some of
Mm,
like showing it to myself, and of course there's the added benefit of people being able to see it more directly in the way that
right.
society understands it, right? So it's not like transition in of itself, whether it's social, medical, or legal, is about being able to align oneself. One is what is one is, and now things are going to match up better in one's own understanding, not necessarily by society's standards. Some of
Right.
it may, others it may not,
Hmm.
right? And I
Hmm.
think that's where people really struggle when there's not that societal alignment, or um, one is not needing all of the things, so
Right.
it just
Like, as in, people aren't needing, like, let's say, for example, gender affirming care. They're just, let's say, they're changing their name and pronouns, but they're not taking on other aspects that you would expect. Is that what you're
yeah,
getting at?
yeah, yeah. So it just doesn't align in the ways that people would expect, and that's because of the
Hmm.
orientation. People often are, especially cisgender folks, are thinking about how does one perform this thing rather
Hmm.
than being oneself. That's the main
Right.
focus of trans and non-binary folks, is how do I be myself, and
Hmm.
what things do I need to do or change or update to make that reflected to myself and others. And so it's a just
Hmm.
totally different way of looking at it. And I think
Right.
we talk across each other because of it.
Yeah, there's no meeting in the middle somewhere.
It's tough.
I want to talk about how this is social transition is not just a trans people thing. This
Yes.
isn't just trans people and non binary people that do this. We might
Hmm.
not call it socially transitioning when we're talking about
Uh-huh.
cis people, but that is essentially what's going on. And people change their first names all the time for various different reasons. And even
Hmm.
changing your last name when, for example, when people get married is one reason, a very common reason that people change their last name. That
Hmm.
is, for a lot of people, very exciting, very affirming. It's a real sort of moment for them to mark the next stage of their life, whatever that looks like for them.
Hmm.
Um, is is it all that different to socially transitioning for trans and non-binary people?
I mean, I don't think so. I like the analogy, or for us to think about it broader than
Mm.
just a trans thing or trans or non-binary thing, because we maybe haven't mapped it together for people to
Mm-hmm.
understand. One, it's really important, these types of steps. Two,
Mm-hmm.
takes a little work. And maybe that work
Right.
could be a little easier. Like, it's way easier to change your last name because things are set
Mm-hmm.
up to make that
Mm-hmm.
possible, It's a little more hard, like it's a little harder, maybe even a lot harder for trans and non-binary folks to change. But I would say that there is a social transition when somebody, a cisgender person, changes their name.
Mm-hmm.
When it's through marriage, you are combining yourself with another person and you're
Mm-hmm.
creating a, a pathway together, right? And that's marked and celebrated and supported, and all these great things, which it should. And it is an
Mm-hmm.
exciting moment. Now, not every woman is excited by taking the last name, or person in
Nor do you have
general.
to do it.
Nope, nope. But for those who do, like that, it's wonderful that it's wonderful, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and there are also folks who change their first name, and there's a variety of different reasons why cisgender people do different names. Let's talk about the cultural ones first. I know in indigenous nations and communities, they're marking different milestones with different names that you take on
Mm-hmm.
that have deep meaning and resonance and are based on that person's personality and their gifts and their skills and what the family hopes they will become. There's so much there, and their spiritual connection to ancestors, et cetera, et cetera. There are, other cultures around the world that do similar things.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of tied to rites of passage. And there's also folks who maybe not related to culture, but through family, if somebody dies and they were really close to that person, they may take on that person's name, right?
Mm-hmm.
As like a way to honor, right? So there's just like all these different ways that people are updating their first names, whether it's only socially and or perhaps even legally.
Mm-hmm.
And somehow that's accepted, but for some people, trans and non-binary names are not, is very
Mm-hmm.
confusing. I don't
I
understand that.
agree.
Yeah.
Yeah, and like it's sort of a similar process. Like I remember when my sister got married, and she had obviously my last name, and then
Mm,
after getting married, had changed her last name, and everybody kept slipping up and saying the old name, and then being like, "Oh, sorry, I meant this name," and it was just sort
mm,
of until people got used to it, and now people are used to it, and they wouldn't even consider calling her by her old last name. And it's just things like that. There are so many parallels, and yeah, the only difference is that it's socially accepted, that
yeah.
it's understood and socially accepted. But
Yeah.
aside from that, it's really not that different. And that could extend to so many things, like, I don't know, using a nickname. That's
Mm,
not to suggest that trans and non-binary names are nicknames, but it's a similar kind of concept. For, let's say, for example, a cis person wants to go
mm,
by a sort of a nickname with their friends. Why is that not a social transition? Like, it
yeah.
is. That's all that is. No.
Yeah. People are updating things and adjusting things, and it could be for, joyful reasons. It could be for sad reasons. Like, it's just, I wish we were factored into a broader dynamic
Hmm.
and, uh, you know, variability that is there. It exists,
Right.
and we're just one aspect of a much larger expression of that.
Hmm. So, when sort of to close up here, I wanted to ask about what this looks like in a workplace setting, and
Mm,
if workplaces are wanting to be supportive of people who are socially transitioning, and understanding that flexibility within that too. How can
mm,
workplaces sort of set themselves up for success to make sure that
mhm.
they can support trans and non-binary people?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the system side is really important, especially for names and or pronouns, and we have a lot of
Hmm.
episodes on that, so I won't spend a lot of time there. But to allow somebody to have two first names is critical, and to
Hmm.
action the chosen name, not the legal name, because that is different for folks and makes a market difference to being respected and accepted within the workplace. So there's that piece of the puzzle. The other side is the expression part. And most people kind of overlook it until they're faced with it because it is so visible. And we in society make tremendous amount of assumptions based on how somebody looks,
Right.
what
Right.
their pronouns are, what we expect their name to be or not to be, what kind of clothing they should wear. So there's a lot of expectations in the workplace. In fact, the more
Hmm.
formal a workplace, the greater the expectations. So it's
Right.
looking at your workplace culture to understand where along the continuum that they lie and how to support somebody if, for example, they start to change their expression
Hmm.
in ways where people are starting to wonder, question, stare, all of those things that come along,
Right.
not to make assumptions about what that means. It could be a
Mm.
cisgender person who wants to express themselves in this way, and that's perfectly valid, wonderful, should be supported. Um, and then there could be an instance in which that then is something deeper that is related to gender identity that either people share at some point or never, right? Like, so just
Right.
want to have that ability for people to express themselves. And if somebody starts to do that, it's really important to be explicit in that support,
Hmm.
especially if people are pushing back on that person. Or it doesn't even have to be problematic. It's just even questions about
Right.
why somebody is doing that are invasive and can
Hmm.
then have people second guess the expression or difference in appearance. So those are some of the dynamics and elements that need to be put in place. I would say even before somebody shows up with a different expression, right? Having
Right.
conversations with team members about, you know, appearances, and they don't have to match gender identity,
Right.
and if you have a customer safe facing staff, that is really good practice for this type of unpacking, that can
Hmm.
then also benefit employees.
Well, thank you so much, Kai.
Hmm.
Is there anything else that you wanted to add? I don't know if we've missed anything.
No, I think we covered a lot of good ground here today, talking about social transition and all the various dimensions of it and challenges, whether in and outside of the workplace. But hopefully it helps kind of shed some light and what we can do to make things better.
Cool. Thank you so much, and see you next week.
Okay, bye.